All right, everybody, welcome back. Today, we're going to be tackling something that I think we can all relate to, and that's procrastination. You know that feeling, right? That you've got a deadline coming up and suddenly, like, reorganizing your sock drawer seems like the most important thing in the world. But don't worry, we're not just going to scratch the surface today. We've got this awesome guide called Overcoming Procrastination, a practical guide. And we're going to use this to really unpack like why we procrastinate, not just how to beat it, but like where it comes from. And then we're going to get into some really actionable strategies. Sound good?
Sounds great. Yeah. There's so much in this guide.
It's really cool. I mean, it's a kind of like a deep dive today.
Yeah.
So one of the things I thought was really interesting was that the guide talks about how procrastination isn't just laziness. It's something deeper than that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. We often just label it as laziness, but it's really about avoiding like the negative feelings that a task triggers. It's not that we're avoiding the task itself, but it's those feelings that come up when we think about doing it, you know?
Yeah, and the guide uses this great example of like going to the dentist. Like, you know you should go to the dentist.
Right.
But the thought of it just fills you with dread, so you just keep putting it off.
Exactly. It's not that you're neglecting your teeth, it's that you don't want to deal with the anxiety of it all. Procrastination is very similar in that way. Like, fear of failure is a big one. Like, what if I give it my all and it's still not good enough?
Oh, yeah, I feel that one.
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
The guide also talks about feeling overwhelmed. And I know we've all been there too. It's like when you walk into a room and it is just piled high with clutter.
Oh, yeah.
The thought of even starting to clean it feels so impossible that you just want to shut the door and forget it exists.
Yeah. Yeah, your brain just goes into avoidance mode because the task just feels too big. So the question is, how do we break free from this cycle of procrastination? And this is where the guide really shines. It offers some really practical strategies.
I was really surprised by how actionable the advice in this guide was. Like, breaking tasks down into smaller steps seems so simple, but it's actually brilliant.
It is. It's all about like shifting your perspective. So instead of looking at this big, huge project, you break it down into these smaller, manageable chunks. Like, for example, instead of saying, write that report, which can feel very overwhelming.
Oh, yeah.
Your to-do list becomes outline the key points, research industry trends, and then draft the introduction. And suddenly it feels way less daunting.
Okay, so breaking it down makes it less scary, but what if even those smaller steps still feel overwhelming?
Well, that's where the 5-minute rule comes in.
Okay.
You just commit to working on something for 5 minutes.
That's it?
That's it. It sounds too easy to be true, but there's a really interesting reason why it works.
Well, is it just tricking yourself? Like, how do you make sure that those 5 minutes don't just turn into another procrastination tactic?
It's the beauty of it. It plays on this idea of activation energy. That's the initial effort it takes to start any task. And once you overcome that initial hurdle, you often find yourself just naturally wanting to continue. It's like pushing a heavy boulder. The hardest part is getting it moving, and then momentum takes over.
That makes so much sense. And the guide also talks about the Pomodoro technique. Can you explain what that is for our listeners?
Sure. The Pomodoro technique is all about working in focused intervals. So like 25 minutes of focused work followed by a short break.
Yeah.
And it just creates like this natural rhythm to your workday, and it helps you stay on track and avoid burnout.
So it's really about building better habits for the long term, not just these quick fixes.
Exactly. It's about creating systems that set you up for success. It's like having a well-organized toolbox where every tool has its place and is ready when you need it.
Oh, I love that analogy. But the guide also mentions that sometimes procrastination can actually be a symptom of something deeper, like anxiety or perfectionism.
That's an important point. It's so important to be self-aware and pay attention to your own patterns. Like, are there certain situations or types of tasks that always trigger your procrastination? Is it presentations? Is it writing reports?
Yeah. How can our listeners figure out if their procrastination is coming from something more serious? What are some steps they can take?
Well, one good starting point is to just start journaling or even just reflecting on those triggers. What thoughts and feelings come up when you face those tasks? Are you afraid of being judged? Do you feel overwhelmed by this need to be perfect? Recognizing those patterns is the first step towards addressing them.
So it's like peeling back the layers to understand the root cause.
Exactly. And sometimes those root causes might require professional help. So if you find that anxiety or perfectionism is really holding you back, therapy or counseling can be incredibly helpful.
Absolutely. And finally, the guide really emphasizes something I think is so important, and that's self-compassion.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
We're all human. We all
Yeah.
procrastinate sometimes. And beating yourself up about it only makes things worse.
Yeah, it just adds to those negative feelings and it makes it harder to move forward.
It's that whole progress over perfection thing, right?
Exactly. Every experience, even the times you procrastinate, is a chance to learn and get better.
So be kind to yourself. And with that in mind, let's do a quick recap of what we learned today. Procrastination is something we can overcome. It's about figuring out your triggers, building a system that works for you, and being kind to yourself throughout the process. So now here's a thought I want to leave you with. Think back to a recent time that you procrastinated. What was at the root of it? Was it fear? Was it feeling overwhelmed? Was it something else entirely? What is one strategy we talked about today that you could try next time to approach that situation differently? Remember, even small changes can have a big impact. All right, everyone, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. See ya next time.
Bye!